there's this paradox with technology, which is that it claims to make our lives easier. Some ways it does. Sure, I can look up my traffic map on my way to wherever. But friction is where learning happens. We need moments of friction. And so when we give kids iPads and tablets at school and they're using them at lunch, they are avoiding the friction. You have to give them those real world skills first. And I know that's scary as a parent. I mean, I'm here to say, it's not easy, but it's the best thing you can do for your child.
Welcome to the ADHD Parenting Podcast with Mike McLeod of Grow Now ADHD and Ryan Wexelblatt of ADHD Dude. Learn about parenting kids with ADHD from a licensed clinical social worker and speech-language pathologist who specializes in ADHD. No fluffy parenting advice, only practical information that will equip you to help your child with ADHD effectively.
Today we have a very special guest that I am so excited to share with everybody. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Emily Cherkin, and I am the Screentime Consultant. I'm also a mom of two and a former classroom teacher.
Awesome. And I had the privilege of doing an Instagram Live with Emily a few months ago. As you all know from our previous Screen Time episode, I am very passionate about screens. And for all you parents out there that did do a great job of eliminating screens in the home, now all of a sudden your child is coming home with a MacBook, a Chromebook, a tablet, something. So EdTech has certainly really been something quite negative, especially for the ADHD community, ADHD students, and ADHD parents. So this is a conversation I'm so excited to have. And let's jump right into it. So let's really talk about the overall current tech issue. Emily, where do you see this issue going? Do we see it improving in any way, shape, or form? Or is it just going to continue to grow and get worse?
I think the pendulum swing is still heading towards bad. I'd love to see a reversal. I think it will get there. It's just slow because a lot of this takes time. So I think we've seen with the phone-free schools movement, 10 years into this experiment of kids with phones, there's been a pushback finally, which is great. I think EdTech is sort of the second wave. We're riding the very beginning of it now. My hope is that we will all get on the same page about it not being great for learning for most kids. And yet I don't see that happening quite yet.
Emily, can you share with us what grades you taught?
Yeah, I taught 7th grade English, and I taught at a school that had a wide range of student abilities. That was actually part of the focus of the school, was meeting kids all over the learning needs continuum. And so it was actually a really powerful experience as a teacher to try to figure out how to best differentiate for my students. And one of the things that happened was when I first entered the classroom, there was really minimal tech. We had laptop carts for word processing, with final, essay drafts. But it was about 10 years into my teaching career of a 12-year career that I was really, a lot more pressure started to be putting on me as a teacher to upload assignments, grade things online. And what I noticed immediately was a drive from coming to talk to me. My students stopped advocating for themselves, all of this executive function stuff that we want middle schoolers to really be, locking in during those developmental milestone years. And instead I got emails from parents, why is my kid getting this grade? What happened to this assignment? Haven't you graded this? And at the same time, kids were getting smartphones and social media. So it was a perfect storm. This is about 10 years ago that this happened. And so my feeling and observation as a parent is it's gotten much worse in terms of used to be just sort of grades and assignments were online, but now we're looking at full curricula online.
And when you said earlier you were getting a lot of pressure to use tech more, where would you say that pressure was coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely from the school. A lot of the teacher professional development I had done in my beginning of my career was all yay, STEM. Tech is the future of education. Isn't this going to be amazing? I posted about this the other day with Bill Gates in 2013 saying we don't know what's going to happen with all this technology in the classroom, but we'll know in a decade. And here we are a decade later, and I would say, spoiler alert, hasn't worked at all. And if anything, it's been detrimental and harmful to children in learning.
Yeah, so I would say while we're on that topic, so we don't discuss it later, what kind of are those stats a decade later?
Yeah, so we know that test scores, for example, national numbers peaked in around 2012, 2013, and have been declining ever since. So that is certainly a red flag right there. And I know school systems are complicated and complex, and there's lots of nuance to it, but I would say that's a problem. UNESCO did a great report on the state of EdTech last year, and what they found was that broadly speaking, EdTech has been a failure, that it has not improved learning, has not made kids more engaged learners or curious, and that any of the research saying EdTech has been beneficial to learning has been funded by the companies themselves. And that to me is one of the most important messages for parents to hear, is that know your source, follow the money. Like if it's a company saying that this is good for learning, who funded that research? And that is why I make a really big effort in my work to only cite independently funded or independently done research, right? Because it's too murky. It's a fox guarding the hen house. So I take issue with that quite a bit.
And you also like to have that famous quote about the sweater vest, correct?
Yes. So I always say EdTech is just big tech in a sweater vest, because, it's dressed up to look, beneficial and good and helping learning. And really it's the same exact manipulative design features, gamification, persuasive design, data mining, privacy violations that, all the other big tech platforms are totally guilty of. And I also want to clarify too, I am not anti-tech. I am tech intentional. So what I really believe and wish were that we were kind of back 10, 15 years ago where there were computer labs in schools. My daughter's school no longer has one. There are no library computers because the assumption is every child has a one-to-one now. So why would you need computers in the library, or the one staff person who's trained to teach kids about research and misinformation and, critical thinking on the internet doesn't have that tool anymore. So I would love to see a return to that, but it's going to take some courageous school leadership to get there.
So basically the exact same people that are making screens as addictive as possible for youth with Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite, all the games on the phone are the exact same people bringing tech into your tax-funded schools.
Yes. And some of the biggest companies out there are EdTech companies. One example is PowerSchool, which owns platforms like Naviance and Schoology. Schoology is one of the biggest sort of EdTech learning management system tools used in classrooms, and most parents listening probably have heard of it. And I hated it as a teacher, and I didn't like it as a parent. And it's, I think it's something like 92% of K-12 schools in America use PowerSchool products, and they are one of the biggest offenders in terms of their manipulative design and predatory data mining. So yeah, it's a huge red flag. I think the fact just this last week that the FTC is pushing back on TikTok for data mining and privacy violations of COPPA, just replace the word TikTok with EdTech and you have the exact same thing happening in schools.
There you go. Yeah. And for the populations that Ryan and I work with, Chromebooks have been a thorn in the parents' side for a long time now.
Yeah.
Every day after school, fights, arguments, everything, as parents are trying to micromanage homework. And now it's, are you actually doing your homework, or are you watching videos on YouTube because the computer won't block it? Or the school won't block non-educational sites. So the students that we work with, we know with the ADHD brain and the lack of cognitive flexibility, they like to stay within their comfort zone. That's what screens are all about.
Yeah.
What would you suggest to these parents for the kids coming home with Chromebooks and they're now using that to stay in their comfort zone even more?
Well, I have a very strong opinion on this, and maybe not everyone's ready to do it, but don't do it. Refuse. Because in my mind, as both a former educator, as a parent of a child with ADHD myself, it isn't beneficial. That the harm being caused to your relationship with your child by fighting about homework on a Chromebook isn't worth it. And, certainly under 8th grade, none of this homework matters to whether or not they're going to get a good job or go to college or whatever career path they take. And what is far more protective of children is a healthy relationship with their parents. And so, to me, it's not worth the fight. Now, that being said, it's not so simple, right? We can't just refuse the computer. Well, we can, and I'm happy to talk about some of the strategies I recommend with this, but we're going to need some courageous parents too, to sort of take that leap and say, I'm not going to participate in this. This is not beneficial for learning. This is harmful to my relationship with my child. And it's just not worth the battles. That's my opinion, right? I really feel strongly about that. And, and you guys probably know too, the research on homework that pendulum swings a lot too, right? I think as a former teacher, the homework that I think is beneficial is what kids aren't getting anymore, which is outside free play, unstructured activities where adults aren't micromanaging everything, where reading or listening to books, if that's how kids prefer to consume it, it's not what's happening. That's what we need to prioritize. That's what's going to help kids in the future. But that's a hot take.
So, Emily, I'm a former school social worker, and I also have a summer camp for kids with ADHD. And one of the things at camp is, I'm very clear with parents from the beginning, there are no phones, there are no smartwatches, anything like that, So this is a two-part question. So the first part is, I used to work at a private college prep school for kids with learning differences. I would say every student there was either diagnosed with ADHD or what we now call higher verbal autism. And the school's policy was, every student got a Chromebook or, a laptop. But the other thing with this was that there were no kind of parameters around where it could be used. So lunch, have it out, any, study hall, free time, have it out. So for these students who tend to, self-isolate with technology or tend to, as Mike just mentioned, not come out of their comfort zone, they just would have, basically, they would come to school and have no interactions with anybody.
Right.
And, my understanding is that a lot of public schools allow this now.
Yes. Yes.
So what do you say to parents who, they know that their kids hide behind technology because of their difficulties with social interactions or because their anxiety or whatever? What kind of parameters can they ask for with school, or are they just kind of powerless in those situations?
I don't think parents are powerless. I think they don't know what power they have. I also think that the argument that somehow these tools, and I put that in quotes because most kids see computers and iPads as gaming or entertainment, is detrimental to social skills and social skill development. And that a school and parents' job is to provide awkward and uncomfortable moments for children to practice the skills they need to be successful, and that the computers and tablets displace all of that. And so I think you're absolutely right that there was this sort of like free for all, like, wow, look at these cool, shiny things, these, new tech, fancy things that are going to help everybody. And I want to be really clear too. I know there are some exceptions to this. So I always say, like, a medical diagnosis that requires a digital tool. Great. That is a level the playing field tool that I am thrilled that exists. But the way I see it is schools have looked at a classroom and said, oh, this might help one or two kids, and given it to all of them. Just because one child has an eyeglass prescription doesn't mean the whole class needs prescription glasses. And yet that's what we've done, is just sort of thrown glasses at the whole children or, the whole classroom. I have two teaching colleagues who wrote Screen Schooled, Matt Miles and Joe Clement, and they talk about asking kids to stay focused on a school device is like holding an AA meeting in a bar. It's like, why would you expect, and you guys know this better than anyone, like, the executive function skills are not there. They cannot self-regulate, self-manage, delay gratification, control the impulses to be distracted. And yet we're literally giving them the most manipulative things on which to be tempted. And so I get very angry when schools make it a child's fault when there's a problem on a computer. We hear this a lot in the activism work I do, that the schools are blaming children or parents for things that go wrong. It is absolutely not a child's fault. Children make mistakes, and you are giving them a device on which to amplify some pretty big risky behavior. And so, that to me is deeply problematic, and we've got to push back on that.
Emily, what? I have a saying that I say the definition of insanity is giving a kid with ADHD a distraction and then telling them not to get distracted.
Amen. Yeah, it is insanity.
So I wanted to just bring up one other thing you just mentioned. Mike and I, you would not believe the amount of pushback we get when we bring up the thing about how, screens can be a deterrent to developing social skills. And, parents will say to us, oh no, they, that's how they interact. That's, it builds social skills, and they play Minecraft and this and that. And, I think a lot of that, to be honest, I think just has to do with the parents' discomfort with setting limits, and they're terrified of their child's reaction or their child's rejection. But I just wanted to ask, can you please elaborate on that a little more? Because I think it's really important for our listeners to hear that from you rather than from us.
So that is, I get a lot of pushback on that too. And I also hear a lot, well, I didn't want to get my kid a phone because I didn't believe in it, blah, blah, blah. But everybody else had one and I didn't want them to be left out. Well, first of all, when you give the phone and the device and social media access, you increase the FOMO. You see everything you're left out of now, right? That's one problem. But the other problem is, I say this, my TLDR is less is more, later is better, skills before screens. So I have a 16-year-old, for example, who does not have an ADHD diagnosis and likes to game. And I'm the Screentime Consultant, and my son plays video games. I'm not ashamed to admit that. And we do this in the context of all our family values and other things that he participates in. And for him, he does engage socially, but he did not start at age 6, 7, and 8 spending hours on video games to learn the skills that he uses in the game today as a 16-year-old. So that to me is like, the skill has to be in place first. And kids are going to build those skills through real world, face-to-face, in-person interaction with some adult guidance where necessary. But I think there is a lot of adult interference. Like there's our own adult anxiety about the world and about our kid not fitting in. And I understand that. I have a lot of empathy for that. And our kids are not going to build those skills if we don't give them the opportunities to practice it, right? And that there's this paradox with technology, which is that it claims to make our lives easier, right? And in some ways it does. Sure, I can look at my traffic map on my way to wherever, but friction is where learning happens. We need moments of friction. And so when we give kids iPads and tablets at school and they're using them at lunch, they are avoiding the friction. And P.S. adults do this all the time too, right? When we're scrolling through our social media platforms. But we have to remember that we have fully formed prefrontal cortex, and brains. Our children don't. They're not little adults. And so fine, when they're 25, let's revisit that conversation, but you have to give them those real world skills first. And I know that's scary as a parent. I mean, I'm here to say, like, it's not easy, but it's the best thing you can do for your child.
Exactly. Yeah. And if these screens are given to them before the skills are in place, we should fully expect that to become their small ADHD comfort zone.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many students I work with that are on their school Chromebook on the weekends. It's just there. They have it. And I can't even tell you for some reason how many students have the school Chromebook now over the summer.
Right.
So there's no school from basically the beginning of June until after Labor Day, and the Chromebook is just home all day.
Right.
And they're on it all day long, watching videos, playing games, doing all these things on it. So we're providing them with these tools that are keeping them from doing the exact things that are developing, that will help them to develop the skills they actually need.
Yeah. And I'd like to add, one of my strong opinions about parental controls and monitoring software. And I always say, like, you have to do what works best for your family, and there are different strategies that work for different families. But my concern about EdTech is what's happening is schools are getting complaints from parents that their kids are off task, playing games, watching videos, which is 100% what's happening. And I know there was a data point in an article Dr. Jared Cooney-Horvath wrote in Psychology Today about 38 minutes of every 60 minutes of time spent on a school-issued platform is spent off task. 38 out of 60 minutes is off task. I mean, duh, right? Like, doesn't matter if you're neurodiverse or not. Of course you're going to be off task, because look how many things you can be distracted by. But the problem that I have is that schools are coming up with they're saying, oh gosh, kids are off task, so we got to fix that. So they're getting platforms like surveillance tools and monitoring devices like GoGuardian software is what our district's buying. And by the way, other districts are walking away from GoGuardian because it hasn't been effective. And there's other huge issues with GoGuardian. But the solution now, and I was told this as a parent, my daughter will have 40 students in her 7th grade English class next year. All 40 of them have individual books. And the GoGuardian platform allows a teacher to sit at the front of the classroom and look at her screen and see all 40 students' screens. Now, I did not get into teaching to do that, right? As a teacher, that makes me sick to my stomach that's what a classroom experience would look like. And I can't even imagine the cost of these licensing and yet another tool, when the obvious, cheap, and most effective solution is to eliminate the laptops from the classroom altogether, And again, like, why are we not discussing that as an option, right? Why are we just layering on this Band-Aid of, more tech to solve problems tech created? It makes me absolutely crazy.
So, Emily, I just wanted to ask about what you said. If a parent said to you, does my child need a one-to-one laptop to prepare them for the future and for just in terms of being, having the job skills that are going to be needed when they're older. What would you say to that?
I would say that with the exception of a diagnosed need for one, your child is better off without it because of the skills they will learn by not having it. And this is for I'm putting my parent hat on here. My daughter I am opting her out of the laptop at school next year. And I am literally, as we speak, in email conversations with the district because it is a requirement. And my question is, can my child just attend school and not have a computer? Is that even a possibility? And what is mind-boggling to me is that I even have to ask, right? That's like not even an option anymore. And so I'm confident in I have a child who is uniquely comfortable with being unique. So I know that this is something she can handle. I also know that I'm a teacher by training, so I can support her in other ways. So I know I'm in a unique situation that way. But I actually keep thinking about the benefits that I am giving her by opting her out, because her science and math curriculum are 100% digital, 100%. There are no textbooks. There's no paperwork books, nothing. And, I told you guys I printed off the questions you're going to ask because I like a tactile piece of paper for learning. And we know that the sensory tactile experience of learning is so important. That is not happening on a digital tool. I know that my daughter is listening to Spotify through headphones on the school district computer. I know kids are playing video games. So I keep thinking about what she will gain by not having it. And that's hard. It's scary. I don't want to jump into this and just be like, just say no. But I do think it's possible. And I do think there's some grassroots efforts that's going to have to come from the parent side for parents who are willing to sort of step into that.
So for all the parents out there that are saying, my child needs a laptop to know how to do research, to know how to Google, to know how to do Microsoft Word and Excel and all these things, because tech is the way of the world, everything's moving towards tech, we're basically saying that is in unrealistic fear. It's a bit of a cognitive distortion.
Yeah.
And these kids are better off without them.
And they're not being taught those things. It would be one thing if kids were learning how to type. Can I tell you the number of children who have computers who've never learned how to type? It's ridiculous to me that you would give a typing-based device to a child who doesn't know how to type and expect them to type, right? Or what about research and misinformation and disinformation? Google isn't research strategy. And that's what kids do. So it would be one thing if schools were actually teaching, and maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, there may be some schools that offer this, but a fully, like a tech literacy program, a media literacy program where you are learning the skills that will set your child up for future technical success. But if you want to talk about life skills, what's going to make them a good roommate, a good partner, a good employee, a good colleague is going to be, can they communicate? Can they look you in the eye? Can they problem solve? Can they think critically? These are not skills that are going to come from a laptop in fourth grade.
There you go. Absolutely. So earlier you mentioned this concept of an opt-out, and you're doing this for your ADHD child.
Yes.
What is an opt-out? What does it mean? How do parents do it?
Yeah. So I did create a toolkit, and I'm gonna give you my own personal experience of my child and my professional work, right? So you can download this toolkit for free on my website. It's called the Unplug EdTech Toolkit, and it's kind of going to walk you through some of the things that might come up, some of the pushback you might get. It has a letter template that you can use to cut and paste for an email to your school. I want to emphasize a few things. I believe very firmly that relationships are key, not just with your child and you, but how you approach the school. If you're confrontational, if you're negative, if you're attacking, you're going to get that back. So I am approaching this with a tremendous amount of respect for the people who are working with my kids. And I also know as a former teacher that this problem is going to get dumped on the individual teachers, which is unfair and wrong because this is a district administration level decision. So please be nice to your teachers. This is often not their choice. And often they don't understand or know everything. So part of it is about, helping them understand what I'm thinking about, why I'm doing it. I don't want to make this more work for you. And I recognize that that's what the school might do. So opting out might look like a lot of different things. It really depends on the school, on the district, public, private, grade level, teacher, all of those things. But the very first thing I would do is start with some questions. And I have a list of those too in my toolkit about what you should ask. Just get a lay of the land. Because even within a school, one teacher might be doing a lot of hours on the computer and another may never open it, right? And so there isn't, Ryan, to your point about being in a school, there's no policy a lot of the times, and it really gets left up to individual teachers. So assess what's happening, try to get a clear picture of it. One thing that really concerns me and is a question worth asking is, are screens used as a reward in the classroom, right? Is it a free time reward? Is it we earn points towards a phone party day, which makes me crazy? Do they earn extra screen time if they finish their work early? It should never be a reward, ever, for any child. I think that is sending the absolute wrong message. So those are some of the questions. And then again, depending on how comfortable you are putting yourself and your child out there, it's to just simply say, we are not going to agree to this. And part of it is a lot of districts will have you sign, terms and conditions or like network use agreement. Read them and ask to see them. A lot of times the onus gets put back again on the parent and child, so that if something goes wrong on the computer, it's your fault, not the district's fault. If you're comfortable signing that, okay, but you might want to ask some more questions, again, respectfully, thoughtfully, curiously, with curiosity, and decide whether that's something you're really comfortable with. There are probably iterations too, right? There might be, like Mike, you were saying, like bringing them home for the summer. You can refuse. You can say, no, I'm not bringing it home for the summer. That's not in alignment with my family's values. And in the summer, I'm in charge of my child during the day. So that might be a starting point. It might be that the tablet and computer aren't coming home at the end of the day, and that if there is homework, we'll do it on paper, right? That's something our family is going to be asking for. And again, anytime you can say, how can I support the teacher in doing this? You're going to get, a little bit of more thoughtful attention, I think. And anytime you can phrase it as, this is what's best for all children, and I'm going to be the first parent to ask for this, but I'm not the last. I think that's a really important message. So for my own daughter, I found a form on our district website that was an internet opt-out form. And I thought, oh, perfect. Guess when it was last updated? 2011, the year my daughter was born. And so I was like, well, they're behind. And so when I messaged about it, the form has disappeared. And now they are saying there's a partial opt-out. But to me, it's not the solution. The partial opt-out is to avoid Google searches. But that's not the problem. I want her off of the learning management system and all the EdTech curriculum. I want a paper book and pencils and notebooks, right? And the tools that make learning successful for most children. Again, I realize there's exceptions. So that was a long-winded answer. I've got more on my toolkit about that. But, again, I just would take baby steps and ask questions and be as supportive as possible. But you're doing the right thing. I'm telling you now. It's the right thing to do.
Emily, can you talk a little bit about, for the families whose kids have, 504 plans or IEPs, how can they go about navigating this in the context of the 504 plan or the IEP?
Yeah, so I think there's an advantage here. There could be an advantage, I should say. I mean, there's such a paradox to all this too, because I could use my daughter's own diagnosis, and there's a few other things for her and her learning that would qualify us for that, but I'm refusing to do that because on principle, it's wrong for all children to be doing this. And I don't want to be forced into a diagnosis to get her out of it, right? That to me is not how I'm approaching it. However, if you have one, it's a great tool because you can request as part of that low tech or no screens. And there's plenty of research to support why writing on paper is better. Again, like with exceptions to things like dysgraphia, right? We want to talk about what the tech tool can support that. But it is more often than not going to support your reasons for wanting to opt out. And so if you can fold it into the IEP or the 504, I think that's great. I also heard of a really interesting strategy recently, which was a parent getting a medical letter from a doctor without any sort of a diagnosis, just a neurotypical kid, saying that I want to protect her brain development. And if you introduce the technology, this is the known harms that will impact her brain development. And I refuse to let that happen. And so she is not allowed, which I think is a very interesting angle to take, to sort of say that this is a preventative measure rather than a reactive measure. So again, I approach, with your IEP coordinators, your school counselors, whoever it is that can help walk you through this, knowing that this is kind of an untested waters, right? We don't really know what's going to happen. And some districts are going to be, shall we say, a lot more resistant than others.
Can I tell you, Emily, I've suggested that to parents without really, not knowing much about this. And they have had pushback from the districts. The districts have said, we don't do that. And
Yeah.
I've explained to the parents, look, this is not my area of expertise, but saying we don't do that is not an appropriate answer. Like you have to push back on them about this.
And I will recommend another resource. If that's the response you get, you need to go to EdTech Law Center or EdTech Law. I think it's edtech.law. Because my colleague Julie Liddell owns and runs this, and I'll make sure you guys have the right link. She's going to talk to any parent free of charge to help guide you on what your next steps are. I'm not suggesting we walk in there screaming lawsuit right away. I definitely don't want that to be the first strategy, in this game, but it's a tool if we need to go there. And I will say she is very busy.
And this is what we hear from families all the time is that basically these schools just act helpless. And even if it's something as simple as, can you block YouTube? Can you block addictingmathgames.com? Can you block Minecraft?
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've been asked to observe a teacher and I end up getting distracted by half the class is playing Minecraft during the lecture.
Right.
So why are schools saying they can't block non-educational sites?
Well, first of all, kids are so savvy. I mean, this is what's the irony and the beauty of childhood is that they're naturally curious. They're naturally going to wonder, well, what can I do? How can I get around this? And we know that addictive dopamine, that comes from all that tech stuff is going to drive that curiosity even more. The first thing you can do is just Google, how do I get around school filters? There are all kinds of Reddit threads and YouTube videos about how kids can bypass stuff. This is the other problem I have with, controlling it from the IT side is that it's a game of digital whack-a-mole. You block one site and 100 more are going to pop up within 24 hours. So I don't think my opinion is that's not an effective use of resources, that you need to spend the time teaching the skills, right? Again, ideally analog version, but that isn't going to stop kids from doing it, right? And that's, and the kids always find the back door, the fact that you can, because they use Google Classroom, for example, they can find YouTube through Google Docs, or you can go to Pinterest, which isn't blocked, and you can watch TikTok videos, which you can, by the way, also do on Spotify now. So Spotify is available and you can watch TikTok videos on Spotify. So again, it's I think parents, it's so exhausting to try to keep up with all this. And I understand the intention and the desire to want to have limits and blocks and parental controls. It can be one tool, but it is by no means 100% foolproof, and indeed is often more problematic because it drives kids to try to find the workaround, which defeats the purpose in the first place. So, yeah.
And this is exactly the point I'm constantly trying to make is we're giving these such young children a device that gives them open access to the internet. Yeah. So there's the studies where the phone could literally just be in the backpack, not in front of them, and it affects their executive function, it affects their attention. But now we're giving them a fully loaded Chromebook with high-speed internet, everything. And I don't think parents or schools are even ready to admit how bad it is. Yeah. Last year I consulted with probably over 30 schools where kids were using the school Chromebook to look at pornography on the school. It's that bad. It's that bad. It's that scary. Yes. And all we're seeing is a push for more tech.
Yeah. And again, I will say I'm 100% in favor of the phone-free schools movement and getting phones out of the classroom, 100%. But my concern is, well, there's a couple of them. One, that we're turning to pouches, which I realize is an interim strategy, but to your point about the data about, the research about putting it in the backpack, if it's in your backpack, you're still distracted, it's still on your person. Plus, kids are putting dummy phones in them. They're not, look up again. You can find on Reddit all these threads about how to hack Yonder pouches, right? And again, no shade to Yonder. I appreciate that they're trying to find strategies, and they were originally not designed for children, by the way. They have an interesting history, which is great. But that's a problem, right? We're just driving kids to find that sort of sneaky workaround. And I just don't think that's the solution. The other concern I have about getting phones out of schools is now you're going to drive kids to the laptops even more because you've denied them the access of the phone to check in on, whatever. They're just going to go and find it on their web browser. They're just going to, right? It's again, it's the digital whack-a-mole. It has to be both. And I've been saying this for a couple of years. It's phones are number one, and it makes parents' lives much easier when there's a clear policy to have no phones in schools. But part two is EdTech. Part two is the computers and iPads in the classroom. And that I would say up until 8th grade, there should not be any one-to-one programs at all. And I'm even willing to debate whether it's beneficial in high school. Slightly different terms, but I really do not think educationally or professionally or career-wise or collegially, college-wise, whatever the word is, I don't think they're necessary. I don't think they give your kid a leg up. I think they are more harmful to learning, development, relationships, social skills, and executive function than they are beneficial.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things that Ryan and I constantly see with ADHD parenting is unbelievably high burnout with these parents in these constant fights, and school Chromebooks have absolutely torn parents and kids apart. Every day after school is a fight over Chromebooks.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly isolating because the parent gets so burned out, they end up losing their own social circle, and they think that, their child is, the worst of the worst, and everything is kind of falling on their shoulders.
Yeah.
I've always been a firm believer that there's power in numbers.
Yes.
Where if we can get a large group of these parents together to go to these school board meetings and all just, instead of one parent saying we opt out, how about we get 30, 40, 50? And Jonathan Haidt talks about this.
Yes.
How can we get parents to go to these school board meetings so these ADHD parents don't feel so isolated?
Exactly. And actually, I wrote about this in the epilogue of my book, which my book is more about parenting and screen time, but the epilogue is actually focusing on the EdTech question. And it was Dr. Jared Cooney-Horvath, who I mentioned earlier, gave me this great metaphor about fish swimming in the ocean, right? And I love that they're called a school of fish, by the way, right? Like the irony is so cool. So how does a school of fish know when to change direction? Well, one fish will peel away, but it's not going to move the whole school until a second and a third fish follow. So what I am looking for are first fish, people who are willing to sort of be that first parent to step out, but we really need second and third fish to follow too, because to your point exactly, it's going to take collective action. It's one thing for one parent to opt out of it, but if you have 5 or 6 or 10 parents in a classroom opting out, that is going to send a very clear message to school leadership. We've got to deal with this. We have to address this. What are they going to do? Refuse to let half the class come to school? No, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's power in numbers here. And, again, it is scary, but the beauty of childhood is that children are so resilient and so incredible. And if we just leave them alone a little bit more, I think they're going to be fine. And I try to reframe this as think of what you're giving them. Think of what you're teaching them about standing up for what's right, to protect their own brain and their own futures by saying this isn't right. And I think there's a lot to be gained from that.
So, Emily, I have a last question for you because you're the perfect person to answer this. And we didn't submit this to you beforehand, so my apologies.
Okay.
I don't know how much you pay attention to the neurodiverse parenting social media world, but there is a rapidly growing trend of pseudoscience called low-demand parenting. And part of this low-demand parenting, you're familiar with it. Okay. So I guess you're familiar with the idea, right, that screens help self-regulate, and it's okay to give kids unlimited screen time because they'll learn to regulate it themselves. What is your opinion about that?
I mean, decades of brain science say the exact opposite. Whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, you do not have the executive function as a young child to self-regulate. We are the prefrontal cortex for our children when they're growing up, like as we teach them the skills they need to manage themselves. And, again, I think there is a lot of parental fear. And I love this data point because it helps illustrate what I think is such an interesting phenomenon in the US right now, which is like Pew Research found that the top 3 parental fears in America are youth mental health, bullying, and kidnapping. And youth mental health, we totally get, right? Like that's an obvious one at this point. And bullying is a side effect, of course, of all of the social media problems. But kidnapping is statistically rare, so rare it's nil, right? Like if you wanted your kid to be kidnapped, you'd have to leave him out on the curb for 750,000 years to be guaranteed of being kidnapped. So why is it the number 3 parental fear? I think, and I'm connecting this to what you're saying about the low demand, which I think is a bit of an excuse too for parents who are afraid to set limits. Like if I call it a parenting strategy, then I don't have to look like I'm not doing what I probably should be. But
Thanks for saying that, by the way.
Yeah, I also think it's rooted in parental anxiety about the world, which is made worse by our own consumption of social media and clickbait news headlines. And so we think kidnapping is dangerous, is this real fear. And we give our kids phones and devices and tracking and, watches and all of this to surveil them and monitor them, quote, in the name of safety. And yet, when we do that to quote unquote prevent kidnapping, what we do is make number 1 and number 2 worse: bullying and mental health. And so to me, this is, I think you can be a kind, loving, and gentle parent and I would argue that what that looks like is setting clear boundaries, firm, kind, loving, clear, right? And that's good for all children. Variations a little bit. Sure, each family's gonna look different, but if you're thinking about protecting brain health and setting your kid up for future success, they cannot practice skills they do not yet have. That's what I would say.
So is it fair to say then that unlimited screen time to help kids self-regulate is not what is called neurodiverse affirming?
No, it is. It
is the opposite.
The opposite. Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the one thing that nobody ever wants to talk about is screens are still a pretty relatively new thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago that it was literally just Tetris and Mario Brothers and that's it.
Yes.
But what isn't new is neurodiversity. That's been around, since the beginning of time.
Exactly.
So neurodiverse people were self-regulating before screens for a very, very long time. So this concept that they need screens is complete insanity.
No, and again, yes. And if you are misinformed about that, I would invite you to look at where you're getting that information too, right? Here's a very meta example, no pun intended, right? But like, where are we getting our research from? Where, research in quotes, right? Like that would be a question. How are we as parents learning about this? And is it industry funded? Is it pseudoscience, right? Like we have to do our homework too, because modeling that is so important for our kids too, right? That they know.
Well, it seems to be from more of the lived experience crowd. So that's, that's coming from. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Well, we have thoughts on that.
You got it.
Emily, tell everyone where they can find you and find your toolkit, and tell us a little more about the toolkit as well.
Thank you. So the toolkit is called the Unplug EdTech Toolkit, and it can be found on my website, which is thescreentimeconsultant.com. Irony noted that I'm online. I do have a social media presence. I try to balance that with real life and use my assistants to help me with content. But you can follow me there. Instagram's probably where I spend most of the time, but I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook too. And then I actually always recommend signing up for my weekly newsletter. I write essays kind of on of the moment conversations. And my series right now is focusing a lot on the EdTech question. And my blog is a great place. It's where I house some of the old essays or the previous newsletter essays is just a lot of information. You can search by, parental controls or EdTech or whatever, and you'll find a lot of essays on there. So, I really believe that parents have a lot more power than we know. And I know it's hard and I know it's scary and I know we can do it. And I really hope that my message to parents is one of support and non-judgment and encouragement, but with firm, clear boundaries.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We'll definitely share a lot of your links in the show notes. This is incredibly valuable. School is right around the corner. Yeah. So those Chromebooks are coming back,
or maybe not. Maybe they're not.
Yeah. I think you made an incredible point today that this is not just something that parents just have to accept. Parents have a voice. The majority of these schools are, you're either paying for them out of pocket or you're paying for them with taxes. So You have a voice.
Exactly. Amen. And your kids' data is being sold to fund them. So how do we feel about that?
That's really scary.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Take care. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about Mike's practice, Grow Now ADHD, please visit his website, grownowadhd.com. To learn about the services Ryan provides, please visit ADHDdude.com. You can find Mike on Instagram at GrowNowADHD and Ryan on the ADHD Dude YouTube channel. We'd love to hear your feedback or questions, so feel free to contact us at the ADHD Parenting Podcast at gmail.com. The ADHD Parenting Podcast and content posted by Grow Now ADHD or ADHD Dude are presented solely for general information and educational purposes. Our goal is to provide valuable insights and knowledge, not to replace professional services. Mike and Ryan cannot provide clinical consultation or free advice through social media or other forms of communication. The information on this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice. If you or your child have any medical or mental health concerns, please consult your healthcare professionals.